With all of these awards that you get, is there a check?
I wish, no. There's no publisher's award with large wallets attached.
Give the awards back, or can you auction the medal?
I've been trying to sell
it
the
metal?
medal, but I'm told it is metal.
Oh, so it's not even. What is the point? I don't get it. So I don't know with most of you know Naveen really as a publisher, but I've known Naveen in his earlier and continued avatar in theatre, which is where much of his world started and much of my world started as a lighting thing. And maybe we're going to start even before that. So Naveen, what was fascinating was to hear that how even when you were a baby in the womb, you were listening to your mom singing songs, and that's one of the first memories that you have as a kid. And I love the way that you described her morning lullabies being so deep and with a great timbre, as opposed to, well, later in the day.
There's a little memory trick here, Sanjay. You and I are both aging beauties.
I'm 32.
It was the father who sang, and it was the mother's lap that I ended up hearing a lot of other people sing, including people like Talat and so on and so forth, and all these wonderful film singers, Kishore Kumar.
And this was, of course, to set the context in Kashmir.
In Kashmir, where my father had come from Lahore. He used to work for the Oberois, and post-partition, he stayed back for 6 months, smuggled out the staff with friends and helping him, hide and so on and so forth. And so old man Oberoi was very loyal to him, so he got a job, food and beverage, Kashmir. Kashmir, you must remember, was never a touristy spot then. The film stars, in fact, Sunil Dutt Nargis's romance happened supposedly in front of my 4-year-old eyes, but so they would come home for Prem, my mother's palau and kheer and stuff after a day's shoot, and they would have these little soirees of singing. And my father stand in a kind of Seagull type voice. Nothing to do with Seagull, but anyway.
And in many ways, did that sort of set for you your path of being so involved in the arts?
I think it started even earlier, because 2 grandfathers that I never met. One on my mother's side used to write screenplays for the Hindi film industry, and old man Kapoor used to take his script to a producer, and he would say, Kapoor Saab, chhad jao rati, pad ke dal, we'll read this and tell you. Next morning they would return it, and then it would come out as Chaudhary Ka Chand or something like that. And the other grandfather, who was in those days not even metric pass, as they called it, class 10, was the librarian of the Punjab University. So the books and the arts were kind of, retrospectively, one would like to romantically believe those seeds were set then, but who knows? I think it was the college, it was our theatre that really set us going.
And how did you find your way then back to Calcutta?
Well, he did. Typically you would be 8-9 months in Kashmir, and that was closed down because of the snow, and 3 months at the Oberoi Grand. So I grew up at knee length to...
Talk about a silver spoon in the mouth, by the way.
No. So we would be in the Grand Hotel, and because we were the food and beverage guys' kids, my sister was older, so I kind of saw Duke Ellington's knees and Dean Martin's knees and wonderful Japanese strippers, and it was all like you were allowed access to backstage, in Princess, the nightclub, and Sherazad, which is now a swimming pool. So it was a wonderful time to, just be.
One of the nicest pieces I've read that Naveen's written was actually when Pam Crane died. And for those of you who don't know, Pam Crane was this amazing singer. And Calcutta was really the capital of nightlife of India before it moved to Bombay, etc. So tell us a little bit about that time of Calcutta.
Yeah, because I was plunged into making a living. My father lost his jobs one after the other. I don't think he kind of got used to younger...
Not being in the Oberoi.
Well, no, he left the Oberois, and he was in all kinds of places in Calcutta, Trinkers and the Blue Fox and so on and so forth. So between health and alcohol, he kind of stopped working. And as you and I know, we tend to turn in India our hobbies into livelihoods. And so I did theatre lighting, but then you and I never had enough money, but we had lots of affection, so I had to do other things. So I became what you'd call an impresario, an event manager, and so on and so forth, the early days, before it was a gleam in your eye. And that's how one started to produce music. So Pam and I used to get on very well. And Pam was always of an indeterminate age. She could have been 28. Rumors said she was 58 in the days we were in our 20s. I think she was always over 300, but looked somewhere in between. And she always wanted me to light her, because apparently I intuitively did justice to her. And then I started to produce, and she would do anything. I've had her in bathtubs, floating down from, in stage smoke, and, all kinds of stuff, that dressed as a cowboy on a rocking horse, and all kinds of things. So we used to do music reviews and things. So we were very close. And I had a kind of ritual every time I would leave Calcutta, and I would come back and not feel at home till I went to Madame Butterfly, the boutique she ran, and just sat and chatted for a while. There was a kind of connect. And then she kind of became a recluse and came out of it. We did a concert. In fact, that was Shunandini's first design venture. She did we did something called Blue Moon with Anjum Katyal, and our first editor, singer, and Pam Crane, and Shunandi designed these beautiful tickets and stuff like that. That's when we discovered she had this flair. And so when she passed away, one had grown up with dancing to her singing and then presenting her. So there was a kind of relationship.
Calcutta in many ways has sort of really been part of your foundation, and Calcutta in its heydays, or before it's become all blue lighting and so on and so forth, was really the place to be. What's changed? Has it aged gracefully? Is it still the center of creativity and culture? Do you still feel that it has that sense that it had when you first started so much of work there in the arts?
I don't think creativity disappears. What you have are periods of exhaustion versus tiredness. There's a difference. And the exhaustion can be dire sometimes. And Calcutta has been exhausted for a while. But there are pockets of, there's a lot happening. It's also a very hospitable place. But there's also a sense of, as I said, a kind of parts of it behave like they've forgotten themselves in a different time. And though some of it now seems to be changing.
But it's still fairly gentle to artists. It still has
it's
very George Shaghar, because you can, at 2 rupees, you can still get something to eat at the end of the day.
That it is. And it's also, as I said, it's hospitable. You can, you just drop in, you meet people. And it's also possible that we've spoiled ourselves a little bit because we've created willy-nilly and very organically, without any strategy, a kind of oasis, not just Seagull as a space, but the way of being the kind of people we are in the arts or publishing. And all of what we do, if you look back, reflects that. Relationships, hospitality to other languages, other cultures. It happened in the book. And all of it began with theatre and it stays with theatre. All our problems, our solutions come from the theatre. I owe a lot to, this is something you as a theatre person would recognize. You don't have to be an actor or a director, you have to be a theatre person. So that's a very difficult thing.
And it's actually you being a theatre person that you first started publishing theatre scripts and film scripts.
That's right. We started at that point, Shomik Banerjee, our founder editor, who was a theatre scholar, cinema scholar, and so on and so forth, he used to run a series for Oxford University Press called the New Drama in India series. Girish Karnad translated Evam Indrajit at that series and Badal Sarkar and stuff. But so he actually came up with the idea that a niche publisher could possibly survive if they didn't have other distractions. And that kind of stayed with us, this business of other distractions, because most publishing does the sensible thing if it wishes to balance. So have wonderful publishers around us who will tell you we do 60%, 70% of something that brings in the money to subsidize what we really want to do. But in practice, that doesn't, for us, work. What works for us is you build enough of a corpus of what we call the serious, the wish list, things that you feel only you can bring into the world. And eventually, you know, it pushes at the traditional marketing wisdom. And you survive, which we've done. So I think all of that is also a theater lesson.
You know, you were talking about surviving. Obviously, niche publishing is more than just survival because it's difficult. You're finding new markets. Not everybody is willing to pick up a play script that you have published. Tell us a little bit about that journey and really that struggle because, you know, today, of course, as you continue, like any niche publisher to struggle, you still are able to get by perhaps selling one of the bits of art that you've got, K.J. Subramaniam's work. But tell us a little bit about that journey in the initial years and what was it that really drove you to continue to stay with the Seagull philosophy, which today everybody thinks of as a philosophy?
See, when you are actually doing it, there isn't a, you don't have a kind of, you know, list of do's and don'ts. What you have is the doing of it, right? And so that, and you have a lot of excitement. You cannot resist responding to the material that you wish to publish. So when you started with theatre and cinema, it was a very exciting time for cinema, for example. You had these 10 years of, you know, Satyajit Ray, Benegal, Adur, Minalda, you know, all of these. And so you were publishing them, that movement, and documenting it. You were doing plays in the English language because that was the link. Not because you thought everybody would perform them, or you didn't know at that point that 30 years later, a lot of them would become life-saving texts in universities and so on and so forth. So at that moment, you're not strategy. There's no, the strategy I keep saying repeatedly.
Accidental.
No, it's retrospective, because when things unveil themselves, while they're actually happening, you just find your way intuitively through the whole thing. But there is a particular point where the theatre scripts and the screenplays, which still happen, led to a kind of decision that we took as publishers. We found that our excitement, our aesthetic, both editorial and design, which we could talk about, led us to kind of gently question the status quo of a English-speaking West that insisted you buy and sell only for your country. So even now, most of us are buying rights for the Indian subcontinental continent at best kind of thing. So we questioned that status quo and we set up a company in the UK called Seagull Books London Limited. It's not a branch, it's an independent publishing house paying its taxes. And we said, no, we are good enough, as is our money, to buy world rights for the kind of books that we wish to do. And that is when this whole international list began. And that's when we found that we were using our translation experience of all those theatre scripts into ferreting out interesting material in European languages, for example. We started with European languages and then moved on. So at that point, the strategy was that English language bookshelves in America and UK did not have what they have now. Translations become very popular now, awards and so on and so forth. But at that point, they were empty because translation didn't pay, which is one of the reasons why I suspect a lot of American publishing didn't put names of translators. And in the film that we've done, Shalani is very articulate about the politics of what that means. All I'm trying to say is that it's always been an intuitive way forward. It's not entirely idiotic or romantic. There is method as you execute.
But the very fact that you're not just in the UK anymore, you're also across America and so on and so forth. I mean, at some point of time, this whole desire to get, these wonderful publications out, and your back series, your backlist is really quite stunning and startling. Again, strategy, accident?
No, it's not all accident. It becomes strategy after a while, right? Initially, it's passion-driven that, hey, this is what is missing in the market. Let's try and do this and see. And then you get noticed for it, and you see that it's possible to survive. And survival for any independent publisher is, in my opinion, it has to do with a reasonably healthy cash flow as against every book being a profit center, which is what publishing wisdom tells you today. If you can pull it off, great. But the kind of niche, serious literary stuff that you want to do, you know that you're always going to be tempted with something that's very interesting. So for you to justify that as a profit loss thing is not going to make sense. You also know that a solid part of your list is constantly being reprinted. For something, say for example, you handle the estate of somebody like Mahashweta Devi. You've done about 30 odd books or more, and you keep circulating, keep printing. Or you do internationally the Thomas Bernards, the Alexander Kluge, things that actually sell for us very well and subsidize a lot of the others. So that's your strategy also involves keeping yourself small. You're not going around opening offices everywhere. You exist in the UK and the US, but the work happens in Calcutta. And ironically, a lot of US and UK publishers particularly are printing and outsourcing all the work to us here in this country and elsewhere. So, it is, if you take the globalized thing seriously.
I'll come back to the UK office thing in a second, because that leads to but just going back again, many of us know you personally. You're really a personalized sort of person in terms of being an editor, whatever that means. But is it, I mean, in terms of the magic, is it because of your, relationships that you built with Romila Thapar, or then earlier Mahashweta Devi, where to a large extent you were in fact writing her speeches as well. Is that what helps? I mean, in today's day and world where everything is so non-personal, the larger publishing houses are fairly non-personal, where you can edit somebody's manuscript, but that's roughly the relationship. You go many steps further. Is that one of the successes? And therefore, what happens when you're not around?
Well, if you start at the end of your question of not being around, this is old hat for us. We've had people ask us this. In fact, they usually ask Shunandani, who is not just Seagull editor and designer and translator and artist, but when she completed 10 years of her life, she became part of the company. Because after a while, how much can you pay colleagues who show intent to do the distance? So she owns a part of the company. And later she invited a Bishan. So as far as and they both also own bits of Seagull London. So I could drop dead after this conversation.
Ambulances, ambulance is a little far, so
so
it's difficult from here to there.
The legalities are in place.
I'm not talking about legality.
But so what are you talking about?
About the personalized aspect.
Yeah.
The fact that
now the personalized aspect can never be in isolation. We luckily for us, the small team that you practice the personal within at home is, so to speak. It starts there. You become family, so you take the ups and downs of those relationships. And so everybody builds their own individual style of functioning. Mine depends a lot because I need relationships, right? And you need relationships. We are a relationship that goes beyond Jaipur in a certain kind of way. So it's also relationships of the head, right? It's not just a hard thing. So you may have, my preferred literary form has been the letter writing before computers. And then with computers, it became trebled. And so you tend to relate to people. you become part of their lives and conversations, right? Even when you're not present physically at that level. The other interesting thing is that the Seagull catalog is very much a part of this relationship. It began accidentally in '89 when I used to design this sort of life in Seagull pre-Shunandani and post, so to speak.
I didn't even know there was a life break. When did that happen?
And so I did this catalog, which became, I didn't have the Claudia Kaisers in my life at that point. I'd go to Frankfurt. I didn't know you had to take appointments. But I had this catalog. And every time I went to a stall,
And a beautifully bound catalog. I mean, it's not just a catalog that you see. Just for the record, for those of you who haven't seen the pre-Sunandani versions of it, they were.
So the catalog would allow me to come back half an hour later, and they were curious who did this in a land which was suspect for printing and binding and lamination suddenly. So that was the baggage you carried. You wanted to show your aesthetic, and then that tradition carries on in a certain kind of way. But what that did was, that was not a marketing tool. It has seasons, 2 seasons of books and so on and so forth, but the hardcore selling of books and marketing is done by your distributors, the Chicago Press. So they do that bit of it. This is a relationship builder, if you look at it, which started earlier because you wanted to do something different, not just jacket cover and text. So you would write letters to a whole community of writers and booksellers and publishers, and they would write back in their languages on your annual theme that you gave. So this year's theme, for example, is climate change, and each cover is bound in discarded Ritu Kumar fabrics and that kind of stuff. So it signaled that your relationship with aesthetic, design, craft, paper, everything in one little thing for the perceptive, sensitive recipient of that. So it was aimed at authors and publishers who just completely understood you. And one last thing here was the real, the thing when it works for you is magical, because when I was given the Goethe Medal, the woman who was supposed to do a laudatory speech had not been in touch at all. And I was kind of getting fidgety because all my German friends were saying, but why is she not getting in touch? How is she going to give an 8-minute speech? How does she know you? 2 weeks before, I get a letter saying, can you send me some of your catalogs? We did. And then at this thing, at the ceremony, she gets up and, no, she doesn't. She meets me. She comes up to me. And the first thing she says, shakes my hand, says, how is Shunandani? She hasn't come? So I've kind of, my penny dropped that she's been through the catalogs and figured out who does them and so on and so forth. And then she does a whole speech where she sums up our whole philosophy of affection, hospitality, relationships through the design, the aesthetic, the content of this catalog. That's when it works, and it's worth a lifetime to have 1 or 2 people who get it.
Again, I don't know how many people have received or seen any of Seagull's catalogs in the room. So for those of you who haven't, you haven't lived, and it's a. I mean, because it's not so much only about the printed word in these catalogs. Every page is so beautifully designed that it opens up a whole new world. When I went to Seagull, whenever I went to Seagull, and I saw Sunandani at work, and they were then doing, she was then designing one of the new catalogs. I mean, I wanted to buy I asked her, I said, these are just so exceptional in the imaging that they do. I said, are these not art pieces? And they said they were. There's a limited edition series, and I picked up a couple of which I gifted all around. They're absolutely stunning. And it's a different kind of publishing. Today, I mean, you all have been trendsetters, so today you do have, and certainly here, there's some beautifully published books of art and also for children that you're seeing more and more, but in many ways, Seagull was the leader in that. So please try, I don't know whether you have any in the... Oh. But we don't have any in the bookshop or in the...
catalogs. We have books. We don't have the catalog.
Well, the catalogs are the one that should sell first, and then you can decide about the books. But sorry, Sunandini, you're sitting there, but I'm going to ask you this. So tell us the Sunandini story, because she volunteered to be part of Seagull, and then what happened?
No, she came in as some kind of an editorial assistant kind of thing, and very soon we found her peering at those old Macintoshes, the ones, those tangerine and those bellied, they were turquoise and strawberry colored things, and struggling to read. She was too embarrassed to ask how to increase the font size at that point. And that was the last time she was ever afraid to ask any such thing. And it just, the way the Seagull offices have always been laid out, it's a kind of open thing. I can see what you're doing on your machine, not with a view to e-audit.
It's more a living room for those of you.
Yeah.
Anybody here been to Seagull office? Yeah, it's just a beautiful environment, full of art and occasionally lovely coffee, and great
So I
place.
saw her tinkering with some typeface and so on and so forth, and asked her to do one or two things, and got excited with it. And that was the time Anjum and I were also part of some theatre project that was taking us to Penang and Kuala Lumpur and Hong Kong and stuff. And I remember there was one big 200-page Seagull Theatre Quarterly issue on the Bengali theatre, which had to go to press and get designed, and I used to do the stuff. So I told her that, go to that, just do the thing, and she said, yeah, okay, I'll do it, but don't you want to see it? I said, no, you do it, send it to print. So then one didn't look back. It was just like, a kind of blossoming where all her reading and her aesthetic, she grew up.
You didn't have to chain her to the table.
No. No. She used to bring, that was within a week of coming, she brought a whole, like a goldfish bowl and put it over there, and we had to respect the fact that...
The goldfish is also in some of the work that she's done.
Anyway, so that's where it started, where she started to explore. And as she often says, that it's really not waking up in the morning and wanting to make art, but it's the books that led to, and I started to do other things. It gave me the freedom to let go that aspect. And then she taught all her editors to set the pages. All our page setting we do internally, and the only thing goes out to print. So everyone has some sort of stake in the design and so on and so forth, which she does. But the blossoming happened parallelly, where post Anjum, she then was the obvious person to also be the editing director and the design. So editing, designing, translation, and then we started to exhibit her art, which would also sell and bring in some money. So it's a kind of continuous evolving growth.
Art has been pretty much part of the heart of Seagull, and your heart as well. Tell us that story and the story with K.J. Subramaniam and his collection.
Yeah,
and how that's helped Seagull apart from...
It's a parallel thing in the sense that, because if you go back to the days when I was trying to survive and doing impresario thing, remember we never had a architectural reality of our own till very recently. We were always in borrowed spaces. We never had a gallery, all of that, which made the theatre in me decide to turn. So if you were a friend who was about to demolish your old 100-year-old bungalow to build a multi-storied, you were waiting for corporation permission, I'd say, Sanjay, give it to me, and I would convert it into a gallery for the year it took for you to get permission, or 6 months, and I would show art. Or you would have a warehouse, or you had a new building, and you had a 6,000 square foot parking lot, which wasn't inhabited at the moment. I would put up false walls and wooden battens and lighting. And so one was showing things which were by then institutionalized in the West, by intuitively finding any space to do art in. None of these people were selling enough. It was just an exciting time. That's also when you started to collect more out of a shared sense of livelihood that Sanjay's art is not selling. So, but he needs to sell something, so I would borrow money and buy a little bit at a discount. There was no strategy that you were going to become blue chip 40 years later. So the Subramanian relationship began somewhat like that, where his first book was offered to us by one of his student archivists, Professor Shivakumar. And that's how I discovered his art and started to show him. And of course, not much was selling in those days. Then the relationship grew as publisher, as student first, then as friend. Then I suppose at some point behind my back, I would always hear stories about how he saw me as a, there was a kind of son figure emerging and that kind of thing. And I remember a particular moment when I felt that I had arrived and was fully accepted was that, he was constantly traveling to and fro, and I was booking tickets, and he would come, and the first thing after putting his luggage was a white envelope with 6,232 rupees written on it.
Maybe people can, maybe we can circulate it and people can see. Yeah, these are the catalogs. These are the famous catalogs, yeah.
So he was very meticulous about account keeping. And he would just return the ticket money I'd booked, and this would go on. And I would say, but why I owe you royalty on books? And then it reached a stage where Sushiladi, who passed away before him, she was 4 years older, and she was very ill. She was in Calcutta, 40 days, ICUs, home, hospitals, all of that stuff. And we had to transport her, when she was able, to a hospital in Ahmedabad. And I got 9 tickets, I remember. Indian Airlines used to allow you to remove the seats, put a stretcher. And we did this army operation of getting her there, etc. And I was allowed, it's very difficult to say, I expressed this, I was allowed to pay for this. It was like, you can do this now, It was a kind of moment. It's an old kind of Guru Shishya thing. You almost felt that you'd been given the gift of acceptance. And so it was natural that when he did pass away, he was very clear that his books would go to Vishwabharati, the art would be looked after, there's a daughter. So we became the estate. And there's a huge non-profit side to Seagull. So there's the History for Peace, there's the Seagull School of Publishing, there's any number of things we get involved with and do with other people and so on and so forth, as you do. So the art helps. It sort of sees you through all of that.
But it wasn't just about seeing you through. I mean, today, the Seagull office and the Seagull bookstore is really also an art, a space for art.
Sure, yeah, that's because that was one relationship, but there were lots of others. We were working with Somnath Aur and Meera Mukherjee in the same way. Chitravanu Mazumdar was the first artist we ever showed. There are younger people we work with now, right? So you're still doing it, but you're not, your economy is not that of a commercial gallery where the frequency with which you show, the urgency with which you need to show and sell everything to survive. It's with us like the books. It's a wish list of who you wish to show. And we're very good with traveling. We've created an alternative kind of art traveling sort of scenario where this country has lots of languishing Lalit Kala academies everywhere in so-called small town places. We take Subramanian there, or we take a Somnath, or we take a young artist. They're not for selling, because nobody buys there. But amazing reactions, footfalls, because none of these people get to see the masters. They get to see local. So whether it's Bhubaneswar or Lucknow or Bhopal or Patna, it's amazing the kind of footfalls. For Subramanian, we had these tiny 50 rupee lectures. And I remember in a 10-day exhibition, we sold some 90,000 rupees worth, which meant there were hundreds of young people coming and just buying what they could afford, which also led to a publishing strategy of taking the bigger books of essays, which would be priced at 700-800 rupees, and doing 3 essays each into little paperbacks and make it available at 200 rupees, that kind of stuff. So everything's linked up. The place itself, because we all create art. She creates art, I take photographs, Bishan does. So doing up and converting a space is also theater training. You walk into something that looks like nothing and you transform it.
Well, actually, one of the first things that they used to do is, I think, in the back room of his house, which accommodated 30, 40 people or whatever, they used to have these soirees regularly. I want to go a little bit into the politics of space, of politics of international boundaries. And I remember there was a time when one day you sent me an email or you picked up the phone and called me and said, we are a UK-based publisher because that's a registered thing. And yet the Booker Prize has sent me this letter which says that, they're not sure whether I'm UK and they see me as India. The problem about the way rights are sold today and the way books move between countries, it's problematic. And this particular issue with the Booker Prize really brought that home. Can you share with everybody a little bit about what happened and some of the politics that we see today in terms of how rights goes and how books move back and forth, and perhaps what it could be, and I'll come back to that in a second.
Yeah, no, the Booker thing is actually, there's no great mystery to this. It's basically when Booker first decided to have a translation award, ages ago, before Laszlo Krasznahorkai got it, so to speak, Mahashwata Devi was selected for one, and I had no distribution there. I didn't exist as Seagull London. And I remember getting in touch with a man of the left, Central Books, for those of you who are from there, Bill Norris, and actually sent, because they wanted the books in the bookstores, about 200 copies of some half a dozen Mahashwata books. But then they discovered closer to the shortlist that it was not practical for Mahashwata because she was by then already wheelchair seeking. And I think, one doesn't have proof for all this, so that was the first flag that she wasn't going to get anything because that was a consideration. So that stopped there. Then you jump to when two of our authors were, one partial author, he's not really our author in that sense. We've done one lovely book with him, Laszlo Krasznahorkai. And I was at the award ceremony, and there was Maurice Condé, who was also the runner-up, or not runner-up, but she was one of the shortlists. And Laszlo got it, which was fine. Next year, we didn't even know. I think we missed the date. And then one of the jurors, Hari Kunzru, got in touch. And if the juror does, even if the date, saying they wanted a specific book called Flying Mountain by Christoph Ransmayr, the Austrian-German publisher, author. And then I get this strange letter after we submitted it from the secretariat of the Booker saying, but you're not a UK publisher. Haven't you sold the rights to somebody there? I said, no, we don't sell sub-rights. This is our book. We're based in UK. So we had to go through some not so pleasant letter exchanges where you had to say that you exist, you could go to the company house, you could see the accounts, you could, So they grudgingly accepted that year, and the book got shortlisted. Fine. Next year we were more conscious and we submitted it, but was stopped right away, saying that we've checked, we agree that you are UK-based, we see your name there, we know you have a Nielsen ISBN, but you're not based here. So I said, look, I've never hidden the fact that our political choice was to do the work in Calcutta. We pay taxes in your country, and like a lot of your publishers, we have editorial people there. We do not wish to have infrastructure. That's a personal choice. Your website does not say that there has to be a staff of 4 people there, etc. No, but how do we know? We see on your accounts that you're making losses. So I said, what has that got to do with anything? Hello? want detailed account balance sheets from you. That's when I put my foot down. I said, keep your award. There's nothing to hide, and the laws of your land insist that you put things up in abbreviated form on the website and stuff. But there was a lot of backstage drama then, including you writing to just about everybody else. We had somebody, a Seagull author on their committee, who said, I'm helpless, this is how it is. So in future, why don't you sell the rights to a UK publisher? I said, no, it doesn't work like that. So we'll stay away from the booker, and that's what we've done. And so when there is a passionate author who's dying to be on the booker, I always say that I'm sorry, but we can't get involved.
You know, it's so interesting. Yesterday, I was in a session with Josephine Quinn and Brian Catloss on how the West was made. And one of the things that Josephine argues is that the West was made by ideas that traveled through trade and through philosophers and travel writers who went from one continent to the other, and they borrowed from the Turks, who borrowed from the Arabs, who borrowed from the Indians. And yet today, even in the space of ideas, we still look at this as boundaries. Since COVID, has that changed? I mean, given that now you can be in Australia and be editing a manuscript for somebody else, or you could be in the Antarctic and doing...
Yeah, well, you know, so 2, 3 things have changed. One, of course, is that our own way of functioning, COVID, post-COVID, is that we're printing in different countries. Because freight and customs, all these things have become paranoid and changed and expensive and stuff. And so if I want books in Australia, I print them there because we have distribution there. The US printer does, it's easier for them to get into the Chicago warehouses. So there's happening in India. So because we publish the same thing worldwide simultaneously, so you're printing them. And these are not digital editions, they're proper print editions. And you do the digital in terms of, you know, when you need something that you run out of very quickly. So technology allows you to bypass all this new post-COVID, what I call freight trauma. And papers kind of become like a stock market thing. You can never fix the price of it. It's constantly fluctuating and so on and so forth. So those difficulties are there. But on the plus side, one of the benefits for COVID for us, tangentially, was the Seagull School of Publishing thing, which used to be an in-person course where you could get 20, 24 people. And now we discovered accidentally that a lot of people who really wanted that course can join online because our neighboring country doesn't allow visas, so they can now join, or somebody sitting in Palestine or New Zealand, or, you know. So we decided we just keep it online now, and you have twice as many people. You have no funding support, but it works because there's twice the number of people, 40 plus people who can now join and actually be there. So there are, you know, pros and cons to that.
We're going to run out of time. I wanted to open it up for a few questions, but before that, last quick question, Naveen. Do you see yourself as a political publisher?
Well, I mean,
let me correct that. Do you see yourself as a political editor or an editor of political thought, and therefore is your publishing sort of addressing some of those issues?
Yeah, publishing is constantly addressing the times. You cannot any longer see yourself as apolitical, or the word neutrality doesn't any longer work anywhere in the world. So you're fooling yourself if you think you can remain neutral in any way. That was always the case, only it wasn't out in the open. But yes, if you look at our books, you look at our lists, you know, it's like we did a small little lecture that Romila delivered at IIC with armed guards around because there was a threat. And she sent a hesitant thing saying, I know you won't agree, but shouldn't you consult a lawyer because I don't want Seagull to... I said, where will I stop then? If I do legal edits, like a lot of our publishing community is having to do, where do I stop? Because my list is going to then offend somebody in some country. I'm handling 23 different languages. So I can't afford it. I'll just go with our intuition and just do it. So yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, Naveen Kishore, couple of questions. Any questions? Otherwise, I'm happy to, yeah.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
What an inspiring talk. Thank you for that. You were talking about, I have so many questions in mind, but let me start with this one. You were talking about personal relationships to authors, to partners, to, which is important for your work. And as an independent publisher in Germany, for us, it's also very important to have personal relationships to booksellers, to journalists, to festival people. So, which seems to be impossible in India, in such a huge country. So I was wondering, how do you manage it? And do you have those personal relationships on this level too? Is this needed? And how do you manage to do this with how many people in your living room?
Yeah, there's very few people in the living room, at least in the Seagull living room, there's half a dozen. But yes, we do have relationships, but I think the relationships are not quite the same as the personal relationships with writers and publishers. That's the first in that circle. We have relationships across the world with booksellers, for example, right? And they're right here in the room. But in terms of the media, again, it's been a very organic thing. It's not a strategy that I have to relate to you as so there's a half a dozen people. In fact, I was telling this to Srinadini yesterday, that I'm suddenly waking up at this ripe old age of 342 and discovering that I've just requested 8 or 9 people in the country to help with a book launch that's happening later today of a wonderful, stunning debut novel we are excited with. And they've all responded and started doing things. I said, I never had this. I acknowledged that I was close enough to these people to trust just that one thing. But it took 42 years to arrive there, right? But the author relationships are very important to us, and they carry on beyond their being alive and so on and so forth. You get into their families and that kind of thing.
So 30 seconds more, Girish. Naveen, last question to you. Your authors themselves influence you, and they influence the way that you write and think, and one has seen that both with Mahashweta Devi and more recently, Ramila Thapar. The way that they influence you, your own writing.
Yeah, of course. You're influenced not just by authors, you're influenced. Everybody influences you if you allow them to, if you don't shut yourself up to that. But certainly, absolutely, all of these relationships are not one-sided in that sense. It's a kind of seesaw. You're an acolyte, sometimes you're an equal, sometimes your end goes up. So, the other person becomes the acolyte. It's an interesting give and take kind of thing.
Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Naveen Seagull, Nandini, Sunandani, and of course, Seagull. Seagull has a movie that was made on it by Pushkin and
Pushan Kripalani.
Pushan Kripalani, and I think the thingamajig is on the screen.
I wish Pushkin had made it, but anyway.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
And you can just, take a grab of the QR code and download it, and it gives you much more of breadth and width of the Seagull story.